It all started with a note, a single passive-aggressive note taped to my mailbox like some kind of official summons. The kind of thing you find when you already had a bad day just to make it worse. Per HOA regulations, all outdoor decorations must be approved prior to display. Your flag is non-compliant. Remove it within 24 hours to avoid fines. I stared at the paper, then at my front porch, where a modest, slightly faded American flag hung from the bracket I'd installed the day I moved in. I ran my fingers over the edge of the letter, feeling the weight of a fight I hadn't even started yet. That's when I saw her. Barbara Tillman, 50-something, blonde bob stiff with hairspray, a blazer over her sundress like she was running for office at a community bake sale. She was watching from across the street, sipping her iced tea in that smug way that told me she already knew how this would go. I exhaled through my nose. It wasn't about the flag. Not really. This was about control. People in our neighborhood whispered about Barbara. She had been president of the HOA for almost 8 years now, and in that time she'd turned a peaceful upper-middle-class cul-de-sac into her own personal fiefdom. It started small. Stern letters about overgrown hedges and trash bins left out an hour too long. But before anyone realized what was happening, she'd rewritten the HOA bylaws to give herself sole authority over community aesthetics. Driveways had to be power washed on schedule. Holiday decorations had a strict time frame. Your front door? No loud colors. The list went on. Nobody fought back. Not really. A handful of fines wasn't worth the trouble. But I wasn't like the others. I had moved here for peace. After 12 years as a military K-9 handler, I'd had enough of barking, orders and sleepless nights. I wanted quiet. I wanted a home, and I wasn't about to let a bored suburban tyrant tell me I couldn't fly a damn flag on my own porch. I left the flag where it was. The next day, I got another notice. This time, a fine. $50. I ignored it. 2 days. Later, the fine doubled, then tripled. By the end of the week, I had a stack of letters, each more threatening than the last. Legal action, liens, property violations. It would have been laughable if I didn't know how far people like Barbara could push when they thought they were untouchable. Then, she escalated. I came home one evening to find a city worker marking my driveway. "Repaving violation," he said. "You were reported for using unapproved materials." I laughed. "It's the same asphalt as every other driveway here." "Yeah," the guy said, scratching his head. "But the HOA president filed a complaint. Says, it doesn't match the community standard." I clenched my jaw. This wasn't about my driveway or my flag. This was about breaking me. But Barbara had made a mistake. She thought I was like everyone else in this neighborhood, soft-spined, afraid to make waves. She had no idea who she was messing with. The next day, I woke up to a text from my neighbor, Julie. "She's at your house." I threw on a shirt and stepped outside just in time to see Barbara standing in my yard, hands on her hips. Next to her, 2 police officers, and my dog, Titan, sitting obediently on the porch, ears perked. Barbara's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "This is an official HOA complaint," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "You've been repeatedly warned about your violations, and now your dangerous dog is threatening the safety of this neighborhood." I blinked. "Excuse me?" One of the officers cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Sir, we got a call about an aggressive animal. The HOA president filed a complaint saying the dog has been acting hostile." I looked down at Titan, a Belgian Malinois, strong, sharp, trained. But right now, he was just sitting there, panting happily in the sun. Barbara folded her arms. "HOA bylaws state that all pets must be approved for temperament and breed suitability. You never registered your guard dog with the board." Her eyes glittered with malice. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was just another homeowner with a big dog, about to get steamrolled by her rules. But Barbara didn't know who I was. I squared my shoulders, watching her smile falter. As I took a slow step forward, "You want to talk about rules?" I said, voice steady. "Then let's talk about mine." Titan stood beside me. The officers looked at each other, Barbara's smirk wavered, and I knew this wasn't over. I could see the hesitation in the cop's eyes. They weren't here because they wanted to be. They were here because Barbara had made it their problem. One of them, a younger guy with a buzz cut and an uncomfortable grip on his belt, cleared his throat. "Look, sir, we're just following up on a report. The HOA claims your dog has shown signs of aggression. We have to at least check." Titan sat motionless beside me, tongue lolling out, watching them with calm, alert eyes. Not a single muscle, tense, not a single growl. I folded my arms. "You ever work K9? The officer blinked. No, sir." "Then let me help you out," I said, my voice steady but edged. "If Titan was a danger, you'd already know. There'd be no warning, no barking, no chance to talk." I let that sink in. The other officer, older, more weathered, exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, we don't have cause to remove the dog if there's no proof of aggression. If we don't see anything, there's nothing we can do." Barbara's jaw tensed. "I filed a report." "You filed a complaint," I corrected. "And it's bogus." The younger officer shifted. "If you don't mind, sir, can we observe the dog interacting with you, just to confirm there's no aggression?" I had nothing to hide. I gave a sharp, precise command in Dutch, the same language I'd trained Titan with overseas. "Zit. Sit." Titan obeyed instantly, ears perking but body still. Another command. "Los. At ease." He relaxed, wagging his tail. Barbara's expression soured. The older cop nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Doesn't look aggressive to me." Barbara took a sharp breath. "That animal is a liability. This is a family neighborhood, officer. What happens when he snaps?" I tilted my head. "What happens when you run out of things to complain about?" Her mouth pressed into a tight line. I knew this was far from over. Barbara didn't like losing, not even a small battle. And in her mind, this was personal now. She turned sharply to the officers, masking her frustration with a polite smile. "I understand you have your procedures, but the HOA has other means of handling non-compliance. Rest assured this matter isn't closed." With that, she pivoted on her heel and strode back across the street, her heels clicking against the pavement. The younger cop shook his head. "I don't know what her deal is, man, but good luck." I nodded. "Thanks." They left, and I watched Barbara disappear into her house, already knowing this was just the beginning. The next attack came that night. Titan growled low in his throat before I even heard it. I was halfway through cleaning my rifle, a habit I hadn't shaken since deployment, when he lifted his head from his spot near the door, ears pinned back. His growl was deep, warning. I set the rifle down and reached for my sidearm instead. Creeping toward the window, my porch light flickered, then went out. The motion sensor should have kicked in. It didn't. Someone was out there. I didn't call out. I didn't flip on any other lights. Instead, I moved carefully, pressing close to the wall as I peered through the blinds. A shadow moved past the edge of my yard, too small to be a full-grown man, maybe a teenager, maybe a runner. But then I saw it, the distinct outline of a can of spray paint in their hand. I was out the door in 3 strides. "Hey!" My voice cut through the night. The figure startled, dropping the can with a loud clatter. Before sprinting down the street, my porch light flickered back on. It had been tampered with. Titan was at my side, muscles taut, ready for a command. I clenched my fists, staring at the can on the ground. Red spray paint. I turned to the nearest patch of untouched wall and my stomach tightened. Traitor. The word had been scrawled in sloppy, dripping letters across my garage. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was personal. And Barbara, she was the only one with a reason to escalate things like this. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had 2 things: security footage and a plan. The footage wasn't great. The figure had worn a hood, keeping their face obscured. But there was one clear shot. Right before they ran, they glanced toward Barbara's house, and I knew. She wouldn't do the dirty work herself. But she didn't have to. I spent the morning repainting the garage. The second I finished, A familiar voice chirped from behind me. "You must be so frustrated. Barbara." I turned, paintbrush still in hand. She stood at the edge of my driveway, holding her ever-present cup of iced tea, faux concern plastered across her face. "You saw what happened?" I asked, playing along. She tisked. "Such a shame. Vandalism is so juvenile." I stared at her, jaw tight. She was waiting for me to explode, to threaten, to give her anything she could use against me. So I just smiled. "Good thing I have cameras," she blinked. That got her. Just for a second. Then she chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, I'm sure the HOA will be very interested in how you handle this. You know, given the rules on unsightly damage to property." I clenched my teeth. "I repainted it." "Yes, but the incident itself? It suggests a pattern of discord. The board doesn't like discord." I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. "You're running out of ways to come at me, Barbara, and you're getting sloppy." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. A flicker of something, annoyance, uncertainty, before she masked it again. She turned away with a light laugh. "We'll see, won't we?" And just like that, she walked off. I exhaled sharply, my grip tightening around the paintbrush. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. She wanted me gone, and I needed to know why. That night, I pulled up my security footage again, watching the hooded figure over and over. Something bugged me. Their movements, their hesitation. And then I saw it. A glimpse of their shoes. Not sneakers, not boots. Loafers. My pulse quickened. I had seen those exact shoes before, on Barbara's son. And suddenly, everything clicked. I leaned forward, rewinding the footage, pausing on the moment the figure hesitated under the dim glow of a street lamp. It was a quick flash, just long, enough to catch the distinct brown leather loafers. Not sneakers, not work boots. Loafers. The kind of thing a spoiled rich kid wears because he's never had to run for anything in his life. Barbara had sent her own son to do her dirty work. I sat back, exhaling sharply, my hands tightening into fists. This wasn't some neighborhood squabble anymore. She wasn't just coming after me with fines and regulations. She had escalated to vandalism, to veiled threats, to using her own family as pawns in whatever twisted game she was playing. But why? Why was she so desperate to push me out? There was something I wasn't seeing yet, and I intended to find out. The next morning, I was ready. I had barely stepped outside when I spotted him. Nathan Tillman, Barbara's son, 21, a smug little parasite who still lived in his mother's house, despite being old enough to get his own place. He was leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I walked straight for him. He looked up, surprised, for half a second before he forced his usual smirk. "Oh, hey, what's up, man?" I didn't take the bait. I just stared. Let the silence stretch until his smirk twitched. "Rough night?" I asked, voice calm. Nathan blinked. What?" I tilted my head. "Your shoes." His gaze flickered downward. Just a split second, but I caught it. Expensive choice for a little late-night spray painting, don't you think? His mouth opened, then closed. His face went pale. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Here's how this is gonna go. You're gonna walk back inside and you're gonna tell your mother that I know. I know who did it. I have the footage. And if one more thing happens, if so much as a blade of grass in my yard is out of place, I'm going to the police." His Adam's apple bobbed. I leaned in. "And trust me, Nathan, when the cops get involved, Mommy won't be able to fix it." His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't say a word. I smiled coldly. "Go on. Be a good little soldier." He turned, stiff, practically marching back inside his house. I watched him go, waiting for the inevitable. And I didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I took my time answering it. Barbara stood on my porch, arms crossed, the picture of forced composure. but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her jaw. She was barely containing her fury. "I don't appreciate threats against my family," she said smoothly. I folded my arms. "Neither do I." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Nathan had nothing to do with your unfortunate incident." I let the silence stretch, letting her hear how ridiculous she sounded. "He wore the same shoes, Barbara." She didn't flinch. "Coincidence?" I arched an eyebrow. "You're getting desperate." She took a step closer, voice dropping into something cold, something almost dangerous. "You don't belong here." Ah, there it was, the truth, the veil finally slipping. I stayed perfectly still. "Why? Why am I such a problem for you?" Her eyes darkened. "Because you don't listen. Because you don't fall in line." And there it was. Barbara didn't just want control. She needed absolute obedience, and I was the first one in a long time to say no. She took a slow breath, regaining her composure. "If you want to stay here, I suggest you reconsider your attitude. I can make things very difficult for you." I smiled. "You already have." A flicker of frustration crossed her face. She wanted me angry. She wanted me rattled. And I wasn't giving her that. She exhaled sharply and turned on her heel. "Enjoy your weekend," she called over her shoulder, already walking away. The moment she was out of sight, I went inside, pulled out my laptop, and got to work. Barbara wanted a war? Fine. But I wasn't fighting blind. That night, I did my research, and I found something. A gap in her armor. Buried in an old city zoning report was a permit violation. Something minor. On paper. But in reality, it was huge. Barbara had made a mistake years ago. A big one. One that could cost her everything, and she had no idea I'd found it. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Now I knew why she was so desperate to get rid of me. I was too close, and she was running out of time. I closed my laptop and turned off the lights, feeling the weight of my next move settle in. Then, just as I was about to head to bed, a crash. Glass shattering. I grabbed my gun and rushed to the front door. My living room window was smashed in. Titan was already at the door, teeth bared, growling deep in his throat. I stepped outside, scanning the street. And there, under the glow of a street lamp, Nathan, standing in the middle of the road, staring right at me. And then, he grinned and sprinted away. I didn't chase him. I knew what he wanted. Nathan was playing a different game, one built on impulse, arrogance, and the mistaken belief that his mother's power made him untouchable. But I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I exhaled, my grip on the gun, steady as I scanned the street. My house was the only one with the lights on. No one was coming out. No curious neighbors peeking through blinds. They were all afraid of Barbara, but that fear wasn't going to save her tonight. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and called the police. It took them 7 minutes to arrive, long enough for me to review my security footage, and there it was, clear as day. Nathan, standing in my front yard, a rock in his hand, winding up like a pitcher before sending it straight through my window. A perfect shot. I was still watching it when the officers knocked. They knew the house, knew her, and when I played the footage for them, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Annoyance. Not at me. At her. Nathan had been a problem before. The kind that Barbara could usually smooth over with a checkbook and a forced apology. But vandalism, destruction of property, on video, that was different. They arrested him. Barbara came out of her house just in time to see her son getting handcuffed on my front lawn. Her perfect, curated life cracked wide open in a single moment. "Nathan!" Her voice was sharp, controlled. But underneath, I could hear the panic. He looked up at her, eyes wide, waiting for her to fix it. But she couldn't. Not this time. She turned on me, and for the first time, the veneer slipped. "You did this," she hissed. I took a slow step forward, keeping my voice low. No, Barbara. He did this. And you let him. She clenched her jaw so tight I thought her teeth might crack. You think this is over? I smiled. No. I think it's just starting. And then the cops put her son in the back of the squad car. She didn't show up at the HOA meeting the next day. But I did. I had spent the morning making copies of something very special. That little zoning violation I had found. Barbara had illegally expanded her backyard property line years ago, encroaching on city land. Not much. Just a few feet. Enough to be ignored. Until now. I handed a copy to every single HOA board member. And then, just for fun, I mailed one to the city zoning office. By the time the meeting ended, everyone was talking. By the next morning, she was done. The board turned on her the second they realized she was a liability. The city sent an inspector to verify the violation. She wasn't just facing fines. She was looking at a forced demolition of her illegal extension. Barbara Tillman had spent years building her little empire, and in 48 hours, it crumbled. I saw her one last time. She was standing outside, as city. Officials walked the property line, her lips pressed so tight they were nearly white. She saw me watching. For the first time since this war started, she didn't say a word. No threats, no smug remarks, just a long, quiet stare before she turned and walked inside. She knew she had lost, and I would never hear from her again. A month later, I sat on my porch, coffee in one hand, Titan at my feet, watching as a for sale sign was hammered into Barbara's lawn. The house would sit empty for a while. People would talk, whispers about how the queen of the HOA had been dethroned. And me? I just enjoyed the silence. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but for the first time since I moved, here it felt like home, and for me, that was victory enough.